The call came on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished my tea, the second cup, the one I always make when the morning starts feeling too quiet. And the phone rang with that particular silence before a voice that is trying too hard to sound casual. It was Margaret. Margaret, who I had known for 31 years, who had sat at my kitchen table through Harold's illness, through the funeral, through the first terrible winter after, who had borrowed my good casserole dish and returned it with a small chip on the rim and never said a word about it, which I forgave immediately because that is what you do. Margaret called to tell me that the neighborhood association, the one she had been quietly organizing for 6 months apparently, while inviting me to none of those meetings, had decided that my garden needed to be addressed. Addressed. That was the word she used. My garden, which Harold planted the year we moved here, the roses he chose himself from a catalog, spending 3 evenings at the kitchen table with his reading glasses on, turning pages like he was studying something sacred. Those roses are 44 years old this spring, and Margaret who cried at Harold's grave, Margaret who told me I was one of the strongest women she had ever known, called to tell me the association had concerns. I did not raise my voice. I never raise my voice anymore. I said, "Thank you, Margaret," and I hung up, and I sat with my second cup of tea that had gone cold while we were talking, and I thought about something I have been turning over in my mind for a long time, something I should have understood much earlier, something nobody told me plainly when I was young enough to use it. There are people in this world who are not your friends, and the cruelest truth is that some of them have been standing in your kitchen for decades. My name is Evelyn Grace. I am 92 years old. I have buried a husband, raised 3 children, survived more disappointments than I care to count, and outlived several people I was quite sure would outlive me. And I am here because I want to tell you something that took me too long to learn. About friendship, about the ways people show you who they are, and about what it means to finally trust what you see. You are probably watching this because something happened, something that made you question someone you trusted, a friend who disappeared when things got hard, a person who smiled at you in public and said something unkind when no one was looking, someone who made you feel in ways you could not always name, that their care came with conditions you hadn't agreed to. You are sitting with that confusion, the confusion of loving someone and also recognizing that they have hurt you, and you want someone to tell you that what you felt was real. It was real. I promise you, it was real. I want to start with something that took me decades to understand, and it is this. A real friend does not make you feel grateful for their attention. I spent so much of my middle life chasing after people who were careless with me. Women who only called when they needed something. Men, Harold's colleagues, neighbors, the people who orbited our life without ever quite landing in it, who were warm in groups and distant in private. I told myself that this was simply how people were, that I was perhaps too sensitive, that friendship was not supposed to feel easy or consistent, that the effort I was always making was simply what caring looked like. I made excuses so naturally and for so long that I stopped recognizing them as excuses at all. They became my understanding of the world. Harold tried to tell me. He was not a man of many words. He communicated mostly through action, through small gestures, through the particular way he would refill my coffee cup without being asked, through the way he would leave a book he thought I'd like on my bedside table with a folded corner on the page where something struck him. But every few years, Harold would say something that cracked through everything I had built around myself, and I would resist it, and then a few months later I would realize he had been exactly right. He said to me once, we were lying in bed, and I had been going over some difficulty with a woman I thought of as a close friend, someone who had said something that stung without quite being sayable. And Harold was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Evie, you work very hard on her behalf." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. And I said something dismissive about how friendships require effort, and Harold picked up his book and said nothing further, and I lay there in the dark, knowing that he had seen something I was refusing to look at. He was right. He was almost always right about that kind of thing. People who are quiet and observant often are. What I understand now at 92 that I could not understand at 50 or even 60 is that real friendship has a particular quality to it that false friendship never quite manages to imitate, no matter how skilled the imitation. Real friendship is restful. I do not mean comfortable in a way that becomes complacency, or easy in a way that means nothing is ever difficult. I mean that when you are with someone who is truly your friend, some part of you that is usually braced relaxes. You are not performing, you are not monitoring, you are not calculating what you said and whether it will be used against you. You are simply there, and they are simply there, and the time passes without you having to manage it. I did not have many friendships that felt like that until I was well into my 60s. And when I finally understood what that feeling was supposed to feel like, I understood for the first time how much energy I had been spending for years on relationships that gave none of it back. Here is the first way I learned to recognize someone who was not, in truth, my friend. They were always more present during my difficulties than during my joys. This sounds like a strange thing to say. We are taught that a good friend is someone who shows up when things are hard, and that is true. It is part of it. But I learned that there is a particular kind of person who is drawn to you not out of love, but out of a need to feel needed, or a need to feel superior, or simply a fascination with difficulty that has nothing to do with your well-being. These people arrive during your worst moments with soup and sympathy, and they are wonderful in those moments, and you are grateful, and you form a bond around the gratitude. But then something good happens, something you are proud of, something that makes your life brighter, and they become vague, distracted. They find ways to minimize it, to redirect the conversation, to introduce a note of caution or skepticism into your happiness, not cruelly, never cruelly enough to call it cruelty, just a kind of low-grade dimming. I had a friend like this for 20 years. Beautiful woman, sharp mind, brought me tulips when Harold was in the hospital. When Harold died, she was one of the first people at the house. She sat with me through the worst of it, and she was genuinely kind. And then, 2 years later, when I started feeling like myself again, when I started taking walks in the morning and getting interested in things and feeling something that might almost be called happiness, something shifted between us. She would make comments, small ones, questions about whether I was being sensible about my finances now that I was on my own, observations about whether my children knew how much time I was spending away from the house. Nothing wrong, exactly, nothing you could point to. But I started to notice that I felt heavier after we spoke, that I spent time after our visits reviewing what I had said, wondering what I should have kept to myself, that the version of me that showed up with her was smaller than the version I was everywhere else. It took me 3 more years to stop calling her as often. It took me 5 years after that to understand what had been happening. The second thing I learned is this: a real friend does not make you earn being known. I am talking about something specific here. I am talking about the person who holds their understanding of you just slightly out of reach, who seems always to be assessing whether you are good enough, consistent enough, deserving enough to be admitted fully into their regard, who makes you feel, in a way you can never quite articulate, that you are always on the edge of disappointing them. That friendship is something they are doing you a favor by extending. that you should be grateful. I grew up in a world that taught women in particular to be grateful for friendship, to not ask too much of it, to accept the crumbs of other people's attention and call them a feast. I believed for a long time that wanting more, wanting to be genuinely known, genuinely valued, genuinely delighted in, was a kind of selfishness, an unreasonable demand, something that marked you as difficult or needy. One of the things I like most about being 92 is that I no longer have any patience for this idea at all. You are not asking too much when you want a friend who is glad you exist. You are not needy when you want someone who thinks of you between phone calls, who notices when something is wrong before you say it, who would cross a room at a party just to stand next to you for a moment because they like your company. That is not an extraordinary expectation. That is what friendship is supposed to be. I think about my granddaughter Sophie, who is 25 now and navigating the world with so much courage and so much confusion, and I watch her in the friendships she has, and I see in her some of the same patterns I carried at her age. The running after people who do not run back, the interpreting of silence as her own failure, the lowering of herself to fit into spaces where she was not quite welcome. And I want to take her by the hands. I do sometimes, when she comes to visit and we sit together in the garden, and I want to tell her that she is not too much, that she has never been too much, that the people who made her feel that way were not measuring the right thing. I told her some of this last spring. She was sitting with me at the kitchen table, and she was telling me about someone, a friend, she thought, who had stopped including her in things, quietly, without explanation. The kind of exclusion that is designed to make you feel crazy for noticing. And Sophie said, in this voice that broke my heart a little, that she wasn't sure if she was being oversensitive. I told her, when someone makes you feel like your own perception is unreliable, pay very close attention to that person, because that is not something a friend does. Not ever. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why didn't anyone ever tell me that?" I thought about Harold. I thought about the years it took me to hear what he was telling me. I said, "People did tell you, probably. We're just very good at not hearing it until we're ready." The third thing, and this one took me the longest, and I am still, at 92, occasionally surprised by it, is this. A real friend does not use your confidences against you. Not in obvious ways. Not in the way you might imagine, the dramatic betrayal, the secret told to the wrong person. Sometimes, yes, that happens. But the more common version is subtler, and it is this. The person who stores what you told them in a moment of vulnerability and produces it, later, in a context designed to diminish you. Not loudly, in passing, as a small point in an argument, as a gentle reminder of your limitations, framed as concern. I told a woman once, I was in my 40s and I was struggling with something that I will not detail here, but that was genuinely hard. I told her something that I was ashamed of, something that felt like a failure. She listened, she was kind, she said all the right things. And then, years later, in a moment when I was feeling strong and speaking confidently about something, she said in front of others, "Well, of course, you've always had a tendency toward," and she used my own language for my own difficulty against me in a room full of people, and I felt myself shrink. And here is the most important thing I want you to understand about that moment. I forgave her immediately, instantly. I told myself she hadn't meant it. I told myself she was having a difficult time herself and wasn't thinking. I told myself there was context I was missing, some innocence in it that I wasn't generous enough to see. I spent more energy protecting her from my recognition of what she'd done than I spent protecting myself. This is what we do with people we have decided to love. We make ourselves smaller so that the story we're telling about them can stay intact. It took Harold dying. It took losing the person who was most fluent in the truth of who I am to make me stop doing this. Grief does something to your clarity, not immediately. For the first year after Harold was gone, I was simply surviving, moving through days that all felt the same, doing the next task and then the next. But somewhere in the second year, something started to come into focus. I began to notice, slowly, uncomfortably, how I felt after interactions with specific people. Not what I thought about them, not what I believed about them, not what I was telling myself about them. How I felt in my body, in the hours after. Some people left me tired, quietly, persistently tired, not because anything had been said, not because any particular thing had happened, but because something in me was always working in their presence, managing, editing, performing, adjusting, anticipating. Some people left me feeling, and I did not have a word for it at first, so I will use the word I eventually found, seen. Like something in me that usually has to explain itself had simply been understood, like I had said a thing and been met with recognition rather than evaluation. I started choosing, very quietly, to move toward the second kind and away from the first. This is harder than it sounds, especially when you are my age. The people who make you tired are often people you have known for decades, people who are woven into your life in ways that cannot simply be unpicked. And there is a guilt in the pulling away, a sense that you are being cruel or disloyal or dramatic, a voice that says, they have always been there. They mean well. You are asking too much. I have learned to answer that voice, and the answer is this: meaning well is not the same as doing well, and a lifetime of history does not obligate you to a lifetime more of being diminished. I want to tell you about something that happened 4 summers ago. I had a neighbor. We had been neighbors for 16 years by then, and she and I had what I would have described, right up until the moment I wouldn't, as a close friendship. We walked together in the mornings, 2 or 3 times a week. We had coffee. She knew about my children, about Harold, about the things that mattered to me. And one summer, I do not fully understand why it happened then, except that these things have their own timing. I overheard her at a neighborhood gathering. She was talking to someone I didn't know well, and she said something about me, not unkind enough to be unambiguous, not kind enough to be mistaken. She said that I was, and I am not going to pretend I don't remember the exact words. She said I was one of those women who refuses to accept her situation, my situation, as if my life, my house, my garden, my independence, my second cup of tea in the morning, my decisions about my own time and my own body were a condition to be accepted rather than a life to be lived. I didn't say anything to her that day. I went home and I sat in Harold's chair, the one by the window in the front room, the one nobody else sits in, and I thought for a long time. What I thought was this: I have been generous with this woman. I have been curious about her life, and I have listened and I have offered what I had to offer, and somewhere in her understanding of me, I was a type, not a person, a type. And the type she had decided on was the old woman who doesn't know her place, and no amount of conversation was ever going to change that, because it wasn't based on observation. It was based on something she needed to believe about me so that something else she needed to believe about herself could stay standing. The friendship did not survive that. I did not end it dramatically. I simply, and slowly, and without explanation, stopped maintaining it. And I will tell you something that surprised me. It was not sad. I expected to feel something complicated, some grief or guilt or lingering tenderness. What I felt was quiet, like a window had been opened. Robert, my son, the practical one. He calls every few weeks from wherever he is, always with a very efficient summary of what is happening in his life, always with a solution prepared for whatever problem he imagines I am having. Robert would tell me that this kind of thing is just human nature, and there's no use getting worked up about it. He would say it with the particular briskness of a man who has decided that emotional complexity is a problem to be solved rather than a landscape to be navigated. I love Robert. He does not understand very much about me, but he loves me in his way, and I have made peace with the love I can receive from him. But he is wrong about this, not in his conclusion, it may well be human nature, some of it, but in his framing. Getting worked up is his language for feeling things clearly and acting on what you feel. And I have learned that feeling things clearly and acting on what you feel is not getting worked up. It is the entire project. Diana, my youngest, the one I am closest to, would have cried on the phone for 20 minutes and told me I deserved better and meant every word of it, and then worried aloud about whether I was eating enough and whether the neighbors who remained were keeping an eye on me. Diana's love is enormous and exhausting in equal measure. I receive it as the gift it is, even through the parts that feel like surveillance. She is, of all my children, the one who feels most like me, which means she struggles with the same things I struggled with, and sometimes when she is telling me about her own friendships, I am hearing an echo of a younger Evelyn that I do not entirely know how to reach. I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, surely by 92 you run out of people. Surely the difficulty is not choosing who to distance yourself from, but finding anyone left to be close to. And I will not pretend that loss is not part of this age. It is. The losses are constant, and they are real, and some of them take your breath away. 3 women I considered genuine friends, genuine in the way I mean it, are gone in the past 8 years. One of them went suddenly, and I was not prepared, and I do not think I have finished grieving her even now. But what I want to tell you, and I mean this without any false comfort, is that the clearing that happens when you stop spending yourself on people who take without returning is not only a loss, it is also a making of space. And in my experience, space tends eventually to be filled. The summer after I stopped maintaining that friendship with my neighbor, I started talking more regularly with a woman named Ellen, who I had known casually for years, but never really made time for. Ellen is 84, 8 years younger than me, which felt like a gap when I was 60 and feels like nothing now. Ellen says exactly what she thinks. She is sometimes wrong, and she knows it. She laughs at things that aren't polished enough to be jokes. She asks me how I am, and waits for the actual answer. She told me once, after I had said something I thought was probably too much, she said, "Evelyn, you are one of the only people I know who says true things." And I thought, this is what I was making room for. Here is something I want you to understand about what happened with Margaret and the garden. The roses, Harold's roses. When Margaret called with her concern about my garden being addressed, my first instinct, the instinct of a younger Evelyn, the instinct of 50 years of social management, was to placate, to say something smooth that would end the discomfort without resolving anything, to find a middle ground that didn't require me to say what I actually thought, which was, these roses are not the problem you think they are, and this call is not the concern it is pretending to be. Instead, I said, "Margaret, those roses were planted by my husband 44 years ago. They were here before this association, and they will be here after it. I'm not certain what you would like me to do with that information, but I appreciate the call." And I hung up. I was shaking a little afterward. Not from anger, from the particular effort it takes to be clear when you are used to being accommodating. My hands knew the old habit. My voice knew it too. It takes something out of you, still, even at 92, to hold the line instead of moving it. Margaret has not called since. I notice this. I do not think it tells me anything about Margaret that I didn't already know. It tells me instead that the friendship, such as it was maintained by my willingness to remain within the role she had assigned me. When I stepped outside that role, there was nothing underneath it. There was a time when that understanding would have made me sad. Now it mostly makes me clear. I want to talk for a moment about something that I think is underneath all of this. Something that connects the Margaret story and the neighbor and the woman who used my confidence against me and the friend who dimmed during my happiness. It is the question of what kind of person you believe yourself to be. I have believed this for a long time now, more firmly as I get older, that the people who treat you as less than you are do so because it serves something in them, not because of what you actually are. The woman who needs you to be chaotic so that she can be the stable one. The friend who needs your failures so that she can be the successful one. The neighbor who needs you to be resigned to your situation so that she does not have to ask herself about her own. None of this has anything to do with you. It is their architecture. You are simply a material they are trying to use. This sounds harsh. It is not meant harshly. I understand that people are complicated, that need and fear and love get tangled up in ways that are not always legible, even to the people experiencing them. I do not blame Margaret. I do not even blame the woman who used my words against me. They were doing what people do, which is try to hold themselves together with whatever they have. I simply stopped making myself available as a building material. One of my grandchildren, James, who is 23, Harold's quiet eyes in a young face. James came to visit me last year, and we sat on the back porch, the one that needs repainting, and that I will deal with in my own time and in no one else's. And he told me about something that had happened with a friend of his, a long friendship, years of shared history, and a moment that had cracked it open in a way he couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't been there. He didn't ask me for advice, he just told me. And when he finished, I said, "How did you feel in your body when you realized?" And he said, "Heavy, like something had been confirmed that I didn't want confirmed." And I said, "That heaviness is information. It's not drama. It's not oversensitivity. It's your body knowing something true before your mind is ready to accept it." James sat with that for a while. Then he said, "How long did it take you to trust that?" "A long time," I told him honestly. "Too long, longer than it needed to. But we learn in our own time. And then, when we're ready, we hold on to what we learned like it's worth something because it is. It costs something. That makes it worth something. Here's what I know about the signs now, at 92. The things I would have wanted someone to sit me down and say plainly when I was 30 or 40 or 50 and still making the same mistakes with different people. A real friend is happy when you are happy. Not performing happiness, not being gracious about your happiness, not saying the right things while their eyes go somewhere else. Actually, genuinely, unselfconsciously delighted when something good happens to you. This is rarer than it should be. When you find it, recognize it. A real friend tells you the truth, not to diminish you, not dressed up in language that sounds like concern, but lands like criticism. Not at a moment chosen for maximum damage. The truth, when it needs saying, offered with care and in private and in the service of your actual well-being. A friend who never says a hard thing is not being kind. They are being absent. But a friend who says hard things without love is not being honest. They are being unkind and calling it honesty. The difference is everything. A real friend does not need you to be smaller so that they can feel larger. This is the one I come back to most often. The sign that most reliably tells me Now, when I am paying attention, which I try always to be, whether someone in my life is a friend or a performance of friendship. The people who have genuinely loved me have never needed me to be less. Harold never needed it. Ellen doesn't need it. My granddaughter Lily, who is 20 and writes poetry and calls me sometimes just to read me something she's working on, Lily doesn't need it. The people who love you well are enlarged by you, not threatened by you. A real friend stays, not in a suffocating way, not in a way that erases space and independence, but when things get hard, when you are not your best self, when you are frightened or confused or making mistakes, a real friend does not quietly recede. They do not suddenly become unavailable. They do not choose that particular moment to begin maintaining careful distance. They stay, not always perfectly, not always knowing what to do, but present. There. And the last thing, the thing that Margaret's phone call brought back to me, the thing I was sitting with over my cold cup of tea, is this. A real friend does not organize against you, in whatever form that takes, does not join the people who are deciding who you should be, does not bring the group consensus to your door, dressed up as personal concern. When someone shows up representing a version of you that has been agreed upon by others, they are not speaking to you. They are speaking at you, and they were never, no matter how long the history, quite the friend they appeared to be. I am sitting in my kitchen as I say this to you. The sun is coming through the window the way it does in the late afternoon, differently than it did 40 years ago, or perhaps I notice it differently now, which may amount to the same thing. Harold's coffee cup is still in the cabinet, the one he used every morning, the one with the small hairline crack in the handle that he ignored because he saw no reason to replace something that still worked. I look at it sometimes when I reach for my own cup. That is how he is with me now, present in the objects, in the habitual gestures, in the spaces where he used to be. I do not have an ending for you that ties everything up. That is not how I think about things anymore. I have been alive too long to believe in tidy conclusions. What I have is this. I know now who my friends are. Not many, but real. The kind of friendships that ask nothing from you except your honest self and give you back that honesty doubled. The kind that do not feel like management. The kind that leave you rested. That is enough. More than enough. You deserve that too. And if someone in your life has been making you feel otherwise, making you feel that you are too much or too little, or that their care is something you have to earn and keep earning, then hear me say this plainly, because that is the only way I know how to say things anymore. That is not your friend, and you have never needed to accept it. The roses are still there. Harold's roses. 44 years old this spring, thorny and wild and absolutely unbothered by anyone's concerns. I looked at them this morning when I took my walk, before the second cup of tea, before any of the day's ordinary noise. They were exactly as they should be. I'm still learning how to be exactly as I should be, too. At 92, there are still days when I catch myself shrinking, still moments when the old habit rises up, and I have to recognize it for what it is and set it down again. But I know what to set down now. That is the whole difference. That is everything.